Welcome everyone to another episode of the Strive for Good Life podcast. My name is Nino Pinguera, and I'm here with Daniel Francavilla, who is a marketing advisor and brand strategist. I'm super excited to have him on the show. So welcome, Daniel.
Hello, Nino. I'm happy to be here on the show.
Yeah. So from what I understand about your background, I mean, you're involved in quite a number of ventures, right? But I want to go back to the beginning of your journey and maybe talk about those early influences that got you interested in business, because I know you didn't really start there as an entrepreneur, right? So let's go back and talk about the beginnings.
All right, for sure. Yeah, I had personally, I started off very interested in two worlds, which was the nonprofit space because I wanted to make some kind of social impact, and then the design and creative space. And I didn't really know too much about, the career of advertising or marketing or design or what was what. I didn't know exactly what an agency was like back when I was in high school. And so my first foray into a venture of any kind, entrepreneurship, was starting a nonprofit, which is not the conventional path. Typically, someone may start as like a freelancer or, take a small business course or something. But I started a nonprofit organization back when I was in high school in about grade 10. And that all started because I was inspired by some of the people I met on an overseas trip. It wasn't so much a missions trip as a volunteer trip, but it was a trip. It was called an exposure trip, where we were able to be exposed to what life is like for much of the world. And for those of us who are here in North America, we live in much more fortunate circumstances than I think something like 80% of the world does in many countries, from an income level, poverty level, access to education and healthcare and all of these things. So, on a bad day in somewhere in Canada or United States, it can be nowhere near as bad as how a lot of other places in the world are. And so I was someone who was passionate about volunteering and social justice as a student, and I wanted to get involved and see what this was like. So I went on this exposure trip, met some of the people there, and really learned about a little of some of the systemic issues and, what I could do to do something about those issues.
Okay, where did you go, and what kind of circumstances did you see? Like, what were you exposed to? That's interesting to me.
Yeah, so I went to the Dominican Republic, and it's funny because a lot of people, at least where I'm from, that's a hot spot for vacations. And so we got to see what life was like outside of the resorts, right? In many of these countries, there's the beautiful resorts with like unlimited food and, it's basically you're seeing a luxury lifestyle. But then just outside of the resorts is a lot of extreme poverty, right? And we got to see two types of living scenarios. One was we lived in essentially what would be like a middle-class area, not in the major city, but outside of that. And we lived with families. So it wasn't, a hotel or a resort experience. We got to really experience what life is like for the locals. And then we also got to see what it was like in the very in the urban areas. So like the barrios where there's just like, very dangerous situations with crime and with like sewage water running through the streets, like a lot of issues, a lot of challenges there, housing stacked upon houses that are kind of falling apart. Very troubling situation to see. And then the barrios, which is basically these isolated areas that used to be or are still sugarcane plantations. And I've learned a lot about the history of sugar and how, it's very much rooted in slavery. And even within Dominican Republic and Haiti, there was challenges and exploitation. And so that really inspired me to want to do something. Here I am, like I'm this high school kid, learning a lot about injustice, but then seeing it firsthand and meeting people who just wanted a better life ultimately, right? They wanted to get out of these situations, improve their lives, go to university, get educated and help their families, right? Get a job either out of the country or somewhere else in the country to support their families. So I saw that the barrier was simply access to this education, whether they didn't have a school uniform and they couldn't get in, they weren't allowed to attend school, or whether they couldn't get into university. I think there was extremely low percentage of people who actually graduated from high school and then went on to post-secondary, right? So little grade 10 Daniel decided, okay, I'm going to do something. And I started off by doing a collection for school uniforms. And I went to my local church in the suburb of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And I did a presentation there at one of the services. They actually let me present 5 times at all 5 services that one weekend. This is way back in 2013. And actually not 2013, 2006. And I presented what I saw, what the opportunity was, and what I was looking to do. And that was the day my nonprofit was officially born. And we raised thousands of dollars for school uniforms. Later on, I did school supply drives, and then I turned it into local education. So workshops and conferences and things to raise awareness and train today's youth and high school students on social justice and how to become socially aware. So all that long story there is basically my first foray into pursuing a venture, learning how to register and incorporate something, learning how to set up a website, learning how to get partnerships, learning how to run a team and create an organizational structure and job description. So I got a crash course in that as a student.
Yeah, I love that. That's amazing. Because there are so many, that's really what entrepreneurs do, right? They see a problem in the world, they want to go solve it.
Right.
And I think it's incredibly valuable that you got exposure to a different culture, different set of circumstances for people that is very much a reality that we are often oblivious to.
Yeah.
And so I think that's incredibly valuable to get different perspectives of situations around the world. And so anyone out there listening, man, if you haven't visited another country or seen different living circumstances, I recommend exposing yourself to that because it is eye-opening and it does make you want to change the world.
Yeah. And it informs your perspective, right? Like that lens that I got from that, I've been able to apply to so many other things I've done, over the last almost 2 decades since, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about, okay, so you're doing well with this nonprofit organization, raising money to, educate and provide school supplies. Let's talk about the transition out of that. Like, why did you not keep going with that? Where did you kind of run into some frustration with it?
For sure. So to be clear, I still have the organization running, but it is definitely not my full-time gig. It's more of a volunteer passion thing that I do. We do some annual initiatives, but I didn't end up pursuing it ultimately full-time because of the fact that one, I realized, of course, there's much bigger systemic issues out there, and I'm me, a kid from Brampton, is not going to solve those. And there are organizations that are better equipped to, whether it's providing aid or providing more programs that are going to help sustain from an ecosystem standpoint. But it was more so that just from a commitment and funding standpoint, it would be very difficult to scale that to make it something that I can commit full-time to as well as my team. And, when you're a student, it's easy to volunteer, but once everyone needs to start making a full-time income, you can only commit in certain capacities. I became an entrepreneur simultaneously during this time because as I was in post-secondary, I was in university for design. I felt I could apply design to anything in my life, right? I could apply design to fundraising, to nonprofits. I could apply design to my own businesses. I can use design as a vehicle to be part of whatever I was interested in. So I took graphic design, kept running the charity, going around, taking buses to different schools and conferences and doing a lot of the programming simultaneously. And then I dedicated a lot of my time after I graduated to, like, we had an office, for example, for this nonprofit. We had a grant from a local foundation. We learned what it was like to run this foundation. But ultimately, I wanted to become more successful in my career so that I could then make a bigger impact and not necessarily spend my time, fundraising to like operate an organization, right? When you get to a certain point, it all becomes about your overhead costs and your operations. and less about the impact. So I felt if I was taken care of from whatever other source of income I could find, then I would be able to give back, by doing free speaking and volunteering and mentoring and awareness, right? And I could do that as well. So I decided to continue with the nonprofit on the side and then start freelancing as a designer to obviously cover my living costs. I never took any compensation from the nonprofit. And so I transitioned to becoming a freelance designer. That was what I went to school for. And this is where the entrepreneurship story comes in, because I was able to effectively go from a freelance graphic designer over the course of a couple of years after school to start an agency. And I always knew long-term being in design school that, yeah, I would love to work in an agency someday, or maybe I'll start an agency. But I think I applied to like 1 or 2 positions at an agency, like graduating from university, because I was so focused on like entrepreneurship and freelance projects and the nonprofit. I wasn't like, hey, let me stop everything and get a full-time graphic design role. I applied to a couple of roles, didn't hear back, and just kept going along. And when I transformed it from a freelancer to an agency, I was then able to take on much bigger opportunities and work with different partners and collaborators and other freelancers and friends, and kind of really pull all of my network together. And that's where I felt that I was bridging the gap and bridging all my worlds of like the nonprofit stuff, the community stuff, the art stuff, the creative stuff, the business stuff into one with my agency. So I started that agency 10 years ago now in 2013, and grew the team. And about 3 years ago, during the pandemic times, I sold the agency in the sense that I merged with another agency, so it got acquired. And now I'm a partner at another marketing agency.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, incredible story, and just the evolution that took place. There's a lot to unpack there. I kind of want to go back. So it's interesting to me because there's so many people that want to do good in the world. So for those out there listening that may be doing a nonprofit, it is tough to sustain a full-time living when you're constantly having to ask for donations from people, if that's your model. And so I love that a lot of people are waking up to that and realizing a hybrid model is a lot better, where you are generating profits, by providing some product or service as a way of then also being able to funnel money back into the good that you're trying to do in the world. So that's an interesting topic to get into. Did you have a comment? It looked like.
Yeah, I was going to say that during being an entrepreneur and running an agency, right, I learned so much about business because of the fact that I was meeting with dozens and dozens and dozens of founders, entrepreneurs, like nonprofit professionals, community builders. Like I was meeting with all of these people, whether it was to quote them on a project or speak at their event or meeting them at a networking event. And so I was able to kind of bridge that gap and show that business could be a big vehicle for social good. And that really kind of continued to fuel me, right? Where I'm using my passion and being able to make some kind of impact with that. And impact can be all different forms, right? Like it can be doing mentorship for someone who's trying to get into the career that you're in that's hard to get into, right? It can be sponsoring an event instead of volunteering to host an event. Now your company can sponsor another event that someone else is hosting, right? So there's so many different unique ways that you could partner and co-host things. New things that come up all the time. I love matcha. I have a matcha latte here. And I'm doing a matcha pop-up event, for example. That's like a fundraiser for charity that I'm partnering with someone to host on the weekend. So like all these little things can happen, and you could really explore your passion and try to make a difference as an entrepreneur in the business world, and not specifically continuing in the nonprofit world.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's so interesting that you got into design and were able to turn freelancing into an agency so quickly, because you hear all the time, right, that the term starving artist, right, comes to mind. People that are in the arts or in design that just struggle and don't ever get any traction, which is why so many just end up working in an agency, right? So what do you attribute that ability, I guess, to? The just being able to take that to an agency. Is it, what you said about being able to network and the connections that you had, or where do you think that comes from for you?
I think it comes down to curiosity and having some type of, you have to have an optimistic outlook, right? You can't really sit there in entrepreneurship or in the world of charity and expect things to just be given to you, right? There really has to be mutual benefit, and you have to work to develop those relationships and outcomes and find scenarios that are mutually beneficial, right? And I talk a lot about personal branding, and some people hate the term personal branding. Some people ask me all the time to do workshops about it. But the point of personal branding is that you are a go-to person for something. And there could be a million graphic designers out there. It's a trade, just like there's, a million people that are writers or a million people that are painters or photographers or accountants. But yes, some of them require professional certifications, but there's a lot of them. And so if you can find something that differentiates you, which is the way you do it, or the unique lens you have because of your past experiences, right? Or combining industries and cross-pollinating industries, that's what really makes the difference and helps you to kind of either sustain your career or grow a career that you want to thrive in.
Yeah, I love that. You have to absolutely stand out as a business because, like you said, competition is insane. And with technology and the internet, like that's not going to change anytime soon. The competition is only going to get more fierce, right?
100%. You have to have a differentiator and you have to be passionate about it, but also people need to be able to find you, right? And that's where things like events and partnerships and podcasting and creating your own, social media content, all of that actually accumulates over time and compounds. So I'll tell you, if someone is starting today, I'm going to tell them you should be starting to post on social media and maybe start a show or get on the show like this. But actually, where it really builds up from is small things over time. And so for me, 10 years of having an agency isn't even it. It's actually all the years before that as a freelancer and as a nonprofit person and as a student making connections that then led me to even get the contacts I needed and the exposure I needed to start the agency in the first place. And then year after year, going to conferences, going to New York Ad Week. We invest in flying out to New York Ad Week. We've done that. We've done that twice already, and those are the things that can help you continue to grow and move the needle. But it is compounding over time, right? I might meet someone this week at an event that may never reach out to me for 3 years, but 3 years later, because they've seen my content that whole time and they've subscribed to my LinkedIn or my podcast, now they know that I'm in their head. I'm a guy that they know for personal branding, or I'm a guy that they know for design, and that's my kind of lesson is small things compound over time that really build up your career and your network.
Yeah, I love that. It's, it's interesting because I think there's this culture of looking for virality, kind of betting it all on maybe one video to catch or whatever it is. But that's, even if that happens, which is highly unlikely for most people, right? What then, right? So you still have to have content. You still have to have a presence that, that attention can go towards and still so it's not, like you said, there's never just a single bullet thing that will take you to success. It's multiple things over a span of time that compound, like you said. So I love that. I think that's a great reminder for anyone listening. So let's talk about, you have this agency, you're successful, and 10 years, that's a long time. Did you get bored with it at some point? Or, I mean, I know you're still kind of doing the agency, right? So what led to kind of transitioning to the next thing?
Yeah. And there's been several transitions over time. One of them, like I said, is the merger between my original agency and the current agency I'm with. That was a huge thing for me. I actually originally did that at a time where I was looking to, not run the entire show, right? Yes, I had an amazing, managing director at the agency that was leading accounts and leading the team and helping with business development and all that. And you do need someone like that because as a founder, you can't do everything yourself. You can't do everything. You can't be a pro level in everything. Definitely not. A lot of times the founder has like one or two main skill sets, but everything else is maybe a B or a C, right? And so I identified that over time. I was able to own my expertise, but to really do more in that expertise, which is more of like the brand strategy, the marketing advising, the real creative strategy work, I knew that I needed to change my day-to-day, right? And not be the person who's doing everything from sending invoices to having the sales conversations to leading the team to hiring to all of that. And so it was a really great opportunity to basically get a couple years ahead all at once by partnering with another firm who kind of had a built-in operations and finance team, and they were similar size to us. They actually weren't even bigger than our company, but it was more so we perfectly complemented each other's skill sets, right? So I'm the public facing guy, I'm the creative guy, I'm the networking guy, I'm the strategy guy, but then behind that, you need a finance guy, you need an operations guy, you need a head of like a people person, right? And so by partnering, that really helped me. And my goal at the time was to then be able to take on a lot more, consulting work and advising work and speaking and personal brand stuff. And so it's been over the last 3 years, essentially a transition, right? Where there's, of course, a bunch of things that have to go into the actual transition and merging of two companies. It takes quite a while. And then getting stable and getting into that role, I was then able to identify, okay, I'm going to launch this and I'm going to try this. And I had a little bit of extra ability to, pursue some other things. And so that being said, I had launched my consulting practice under my personal brand called Daniel Does. Just about a year before or during this merger. It was basically right before the pandemic started. It's a silly time to launch a speaking business, of course, because all of the events were canceled. But then I did quite a bit of small virtual ones here and there during the pandemic, and still was able to continue building and growing my connections and my brand. And then more recently, I decided that I wanted to really nail down my focus and niche in the social purpose businesses, so social enterprises and nonprofits and charities. And so outside of the agency, I've launched, I have my consulting practice, but I've also launched something that I'm building called the Good Growth Company. And the Good Growth Company, essentially, the goal of that is taking my network and all the people I know that are amazing experts in different topics that want to apply those to social purpose businesses and nonprofits, and I'm packaging them up in a more accessible way. So it's essentially an ongoing subscription model where you have access to these individuals, whether it's for workshops or Q&A sessions or training. And that's currently what I'm building right now with the Good Growth Company. Of course, I wouldn't really be able to launch that if I was the sole head of my own, agency that was growing with a whole team. But this is one of the great parts about entrepreneurship is that, you could pursue multiple ventures. And if you have different ideas, why not try them? Just like the matcha pop-up, that I'm doing. I'm passionate about matcha and cafes, and I've never done a product or an event like this before, but I get to try it, right?
Yeah, I love that. And that's exactly the appeal of entrepreneurship for me too, is that I get to work on a lot of different projects. But obviously, a lot of us have the kind of the shiny object syndrome where we kind of just chase the next thing and struggle to remain focused on the current thing. So like, how do you avoid that? I mean, like, because it seems like you've done a lot of different things, but also at the same time, you've been very calculated about when you've done those things.
I think there's two things, right? There's one is identifying the difference between when is something is going to be a project or an experiment or a one-time thing versus when something is going to actually be a business, right? Sometimes the mistake people make is they make a hard pivot to something new because they want to try it or experience it, but it didn't actually need to be their entire new thing, right? They didn't have to pivot everything they were doing into it. So there's that. The second thing is knowing why it is you want to do that. If it's just something you're curious about or interested in, that could be a great thing to have on the side. That's a hobby or an experiment or something you do just for fun or for relationship building. Great. But to go full force into that or to add it as your full second, now you're 50% on this and 50% on this, right off the bat is very risky for both ventures, right? And of course, the person in the middle, you, is ultimately going to suffer, whether it's financially or just health-wise and time-wise, right? And so the third thing I would say is that when you are deciding to try something new, always try it in stealth mode, right? Where you're not necessarily going to announce this whole new venture all the time. Try to build some of that behind the scenes so that you actually know if it's going to work. You have some ideas where you can test it out. And before you've made some big pivot and some big announcement and confusing your network ultimately, right? By constantly announcing all these new things, give it a try and see how it's playing out first. When you do end up running multiple ventures, I'm definitely not a pro in this. I don't have, 7 different businesses that I'm the head of. Try to see what role you're actually looking for in those businesses. You don't need to be the CEO or the head of every single initiative you start, right? Try to find ones where you can partner with people to do them. Try to find ones where perhaps you're a founder, but then there's actually an implementer, right? You've hired an operations person or you have a partner that happens to be the day-to-day contact there. I want to open up a cafe one day. I'm not going to be the owner, operator, barista, cleaner, key holder, and, be a partner in an agency and do a nonprofit and do speaking. I know that doesn't make sense. But if I do want to open a cafe one day, what will my role be, right? Will I be the guy that comes up with the programming and the events? Will I be the guy that's the partnerships guy? Will I be the one that's, simply an investor with many other people in the cafe, right? I think that's where you have to look at it to see what you can really balance. What role do you want to have in that new thing, right? Before just jumping into everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really important for people to take a look at because so many people get stuck in a role that they don't plan for necessarily and don't know how to get out of that, when in reality the answer is probably just to hire it out to someone else, right? Or partner with someone, like you said. I'm curious about, it seems like your ability to connect with people and partner has really led to a lot of the success that you've had. It's allowed you to do a lot. What do you say to people that struggle with the ability to connect, maybe that are more introverted, that aren't as comfortable? Do they just hire it out or partner with someone? Is that the answer? Or what would you say to that person that maybe a little socially awkward and struggles?
Yeah, so in that case, it is difficult, but what's important is to have one-on-one interactions where you're just treating it as a way to discover, right? It's a discovery opportunity. You're not necessarily going in with an ask. You're trying to go in there to learn. If you go in there to learn, your imposter syndrome won't get the better of you, and you won't be so nervous about, oh my gosh, is this person going to like my idea or not? Go in there with the mindset of mutually trying to learn and just connect, right? Ask people career questions, ask people lifestyle questions, ask them why. Why did you take this path? Ask them what they learned along the way. And those types of questions are disarming, right? They make people feel like, wow, you're actually interested in them and their story and you respect them. And then if you're more comfortable, you can find ways to collaborate with them because you can identify something that they've said, right? if they've said in their story that they've always wanted to, work in a certain industry, or they've always wanted to do some type of business, and you can make a connection there with them, right? And that does help. Networking is not a numbers game, right? You don't need to just add every single person you see on LinkedIn and hope for the best. It really is about finding people that you can align with in some way and going in hard with those. I was at an event recently, and there was a few hundred young entrepreneurs there. And the way the speaker kicked it off, his name is Swish. He's one of the people I've collaborated with through my personal brand for years now. I met him doing events, LinkedIn networking events, And he said at this event, instead of adding dozens of people on LinkedIn tonight with your phone, now everyone just scans each other's LinkedIn QR code in the app. He said, find 2, 3, or 4 conversations that you can really connect over, and that's it. Like, remove the goal of, oh my gosh, there's 300 people here, I gotta meet as many of them as I can, and try to just connect authentically with a couple of those people, and lean into the hardcore networkers. If you're afraid to ask a question, just jump into a conversation that's happening with a couple people, right? That way you can just warm up to it. You don't have to be the one that makes the first move in that conversation.
Yeah, I think that's a really solid advice, to just look for the conversations. And yeah, it's kind of counterintuitive, because a lot of people do think that it is a numbers game, right? The bigger pool that they have to draw from, in a sense, right, the better off they're going to be. But the quality of that pool, right, the quality of the people that you connect with, and your ability to relate to them, that is powerful, and that's what you should really be striving for. So that's a great reminder. Let's talk a little bit about some of the hangups that maybe you've had in your career. I mean, as an entrepreneur and all the different ventures you've been involved in, what are some of the biggest hangups, and how have you overcome those as you've progressed and learned and been able to grow these ventures?
Sorry, can you just cut out for 1 second? Can you just repeat the question?
Yeah, I'm asking what some of the biggest hangups have been for you in your ventures, and how you solve those problems, just for anyone listening out there.
Absolutely. I think the number one is always to do with team members, getting people on your team. In any situation as a founder or an entrepreneur, you're clear on your vision, you know what you're trying to do with your goals, and you have a bunch of stuff to deal with, and you want team members or collaborators or people to support on that. The challenge is always communicating your vision and actually getting people to buy in, because they have to buy into your vision or your goals or something to work with you. If you're in your early stages, what is in it for them? It's not a huge salary. It's not huge exposure. Like, what is it? And so, it does require a lot of nurturing and personal connection and spending time with these individuals. And I think one of those challenges early on was me having too many people to collaborate with. I had students, I had like co-op students, I had interns, I had like new grads, I had professionals that were collaborating with me that were like further in their career. I had other agencies that I was partnering with. Managing all of these relationships meant that I wasn't able to truly nurture, especially some of the team members that I would ideally want around later. And there were people on the team that I had visions for them, of course, of like moving up in the company, but they didn't know that, right? And some of them were so early in their career that they didn't even necessarily know like that these things are options, right? So that's kind of one of the challenges, is like recruiting the right people that are really in it for the long haul. And you can't expect someone to buy into your vision and just be there for 10 years as you grow. But you can do a good job at, being clear and securing these people that are going to stick around because they know what you're trying to do it. And they feel they feel the benefits of being part of the team, right? So nurturing the team, that was definitely one of them. Another one was cash flow, simply from a service business perspective. My first several years of business, I had evolved really just from being a freelancer to then outsourcing projects to freelancers that were like me, right? I didn't have the whole company structure set up where I knew exactly, on a month-to-month basis what our cash flow was, what our retainers were going to be, what happens if this client cancels, what happens if this client doesn't make their second payment in time. And so not having like very clear month-to-month, profit and loss statements and really understanding cash flow from a business perspective, that's something that was a challenge. And in the early days, I remember having a couple of crises there where one particular time a client actually, they had a board. But when boards have to approve stuff, it's always a bad thing because design by committee, if you ever Google the term design by committee, it's a bad thing. Because of course the whole committee is not a design expert and they're not necessarily going to all agree on one thing. They're going to be talking about their personal preferences. So I had a situation, there was a board. They were not convinced that the website was going to go in the direction that they wanted to. They weren't really aligned on what they wanted. And so they decided to give us one more chance to pitch it and present it. And they said they would vote after that. And if they didn't have a clear path forward, they would cancel the project. So not only did we not get the second payment of that project, but they actually, we had to agree to do that presentation. We had to agree that we would refund them the first half as well. And of course, we were super confident that like I brought in additional people to this presentation, like everyone was ready to go, and the board couldn't align. And so the learning there is, first of all, don't get yourself into a situation like that. But secondly, what the heck do you do when now you owe your contractors money, you've paid team members to work on something, yet you're refunding it. And the lesson, of course, is that you need to be able to have money in the bank available to fund these projects, and you can't just rely on a client paying on time, and you have to have a safety net. So those are kind of two scenarios and lessons that I learned along the way. Team members, and then just from a cash flow perspective.
Yeah, those are powerful lessons, man. And if we can help avoid, learning that the hard way for listeners out there, I think that's valuable. Thank you for sharing that. Let's talk about how you got into. So, I mean, you're doing a lot of different things, and we're kind of starting to push up on time a little bit. But I'm curious, about the piece of being kind of a fractional CMO.
Yeah.
What is that like? Because a lot of people don't really understand what that is. And so maybe explain that and why that's valuable.
For sure. When I was looking at what the needs are of some companies and some organizations, right? Because I've worked with hundreds of all different sizes. I think the biggest challenge or the biggest gap with some of the organizations is a lack of marketing leadership. And sometimes they'll have a great marketing coordinator or a really great program coordinator, someone who knows they need some kind of materials for something, or they know they need a video to showcase something. But that overarching kind of vision and marketing goal and strategy isn't always there. So what happens is it's very easy for projects to either not be on track, not targeted enough, not effective enough, or you create materials that don't even end up getting used to their fullest, right? Which is a waste of budget on their end, a waste of time. And so as I was looking to get out of doing all the execution work myself, again, I trained as a graphic designer, but I knew I didn't want to be doing exclusively graphic design. I wanted to be able to help tell the stories of businesses and charities, and I wanted to be able to help them to increase their impact, increase their exposure. I didn't want to exclusively be doing the design over time. And so that was one of the things I looked into, is how could I help organizations and small businesses and, even established businesses have that streamlined marketing leadership. And so I did invest in training to become a fractional CMO. I learned a lot about that. And part of those roles, part of the goal of having a fractional CMO is that you're not going to be able to pay a full-time, very senior established marketer to be on your, to be there 24/7. But with a few hours a week, you could actually get that level of leadership that your team needs and your organization needs to really be more effective with your budget and your marketing output and your sales goals. So as a fractional CMO, and by the way, I interchange fractional CMO with marketing advisor, although they are two different things, right? A CMO typically takes accountability and leads your marketing team and all of your marketing deliverables. I tend to do less of that, and I do focus more on the marketing advising. Excuse me. But what a fractional CMO does is, helping with awareness and brand building, but by developing like ongoing strategies for that, not just like a one-time campaign, advising and making sure your leadership is aligned. How do you make sure that the CEO's goals and big picture goals are all kind of coming together and the marketing team knows them and all the external vendors are aware of them. And lastly, guiding growth and helping you to keep current and relevant, because as a CEO or as a board, you're very focused on, higher level things, but sometimes you need to know what are those KPIs, like what should we be tracking for performance, right? Monitoring, giving recommendations for things we can tweak along the way, making changes based on the industry or the economy or the market, and not waiting too long. So these are all things that like a fractional marketing leader can do. And I do serve as a marketing advisor and a marketing leader in that capacity. I love doing these deep dive strategy sessions where we kind of just really pull apart everything that's there. We do a huge in-depth audit of all the assets, all the team members, all the concerns, all the gaps, all the opportunities, and then really dive into a plan and a strategy for like a 90-day period or a 1-year period. So I hope that wasn't too much detail, but that's in summary. First of all, why I wanted to get into this, because I want to have, a greater impact on the brand and on the organization. And then 2, what it actually entails, right?
Yeah, no, I think that was perfect. I really just wanted to, highlight that you don't need to hire someone full time to have an expert level marketer in your business helping you, because marketing is such a big piece of growing your business. I mean, you can't grow without it. You have to be able to put your brand out there, tell people about what you're doing. And a lot of entrepreneurs, they don't have expertise in that. And so they're kind of just fumbling around when, they could shortcut their path to success if they just brought someone on that could do that. And most people are intuitive to know that, but then they look at what it would cost to actually hire that person, that expert, right? And so that's where it's tough for people. And there's an option, a third option, which is to hire a CMO or an advisor like you. And so I just want to tell people that that's a great way to go to grow your business if you don't have an expert marketer already working for you.
I think so. And it can, in some cases, it could really steer you in the right direction. Like you could go months or years going slightly off course and eventually you're way off track. But with someone with this experience and I love the fact that I can apply my learnings from other businesses and organizations, right? And actually that all comes together and benefits your company, right? Like it benefits you as a founder, that you don't just have one person that's only working for you, but it's someone who's working on many different clients and can really provide this like holistic lens, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting aspect as well. They're not just siloed into thinking about only your industry and your business and how. So that perspective is very helpful. Where can people go to connect and work with you?
The main place you can go is danieldoes.co. So that's my main homepage. From there, it'll link out to basically everything I do. From my ventures page, you can find my agency and good growth company and my consulting services and all that stuff. So it's all there. And then if you are interested in, again, like my podcast, I have a podcast called Growth for Good, which is actually focused on a niche, which, niches are important to have. Any marketer will tell you that it's great to at least identify some potential niches and targets. But my niche in this area is it's nonprofit leaders, right? Leaders of charities and nonprofits and social purpose businesses. And Growth for Good is about amplifying their impact. So I talk to different leaders in that sector, and I talk to some marketers, and we share a lot of insights and tips along the way on the Growth for Good podcast.
That's perfect. We'll have links to all of those the podcast and your website in the show notes. So if you're listening, go there to check that out and connect with Daniel. What's your final message to our audience?
I think my final message is to try to really nail down your purpose. And that could be for you as an individual, as a leader, as an entrepreneur, as a founder, and in your role. Like if you work a full-time job, I think there's a lot of people here that think, whatever their job is, that's their purpose. But no, you have something outside of that. And I think it's important to align your purpose and your passion. And that is when you find that sweet spot of, that thing you're good at and the thing you're passionate about, the thing you believe in, and it all aligns, then you will produce way better work and you will be a lot happier with what you do. So I think that's my message is try to find those things that are really aligned. It takes time. You're not just going to discover it. I believe that it's true. You don't suddenly wake up and find your passion. But it's years and years of making connections and linking things together, and eventually find that perfect combination that really fuels you and fires you up.
That's perfect. I know that journey's worth it. Thank you so much for being on the show, Daniel. This has been an amazing conversation. To all our listeners out there, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Please share this. That helps us out a lot. And thank you so much for listening. I'll see you guys in the next episode.
Thank you for having me. Take care.